Hey guys, Pike here. This is the Unit 11 Endo video number 2 covering the pituitary gland. In this video, we are going to describe the structural and functional relationships between the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. And we're going to discuss the structure of each endocrine gland here, starting with pituitary, describing the target for each hormone and the function of each hormone. So I'm going to jump right in and looking at the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland relationship. And so first I'm going to talk about the pituitary gland. So the pituitary gland, okay, we can write gland right here. The pituitary gland is also called the hypophysis. Okay, that's another name for the pituitary gland, and that just means to grow under. The pituitary gland hangs from the hypothalamus via a stalk called the infundibulum. Very funny word, infundibulum. The infundibulum is a stalk that the pituitary gland hangs off of. And the pituitary gland is actually seated in the sella turcica of the sphenoid bone. If you remember when we did the skeletal system, there is a depression in the sphenoid bone called the sella turcica, and the actual saddle that it creates was called the Turk saddle, okay? Which that's what sella turcica means, a Turk's saddle. So the pituitary gland is about the size of a pea. So what it really looks like is a pea hanging from a stalk. A pea hanging from a stalk. The stalk is called the infundibulum. Okay, and then the pea itself is the pituitary gland, and we'll look at it in a picture in just a second. The pituitary gland is actually made of two different lobes, and those two lobes are made of two different types of tissue. So we're going to start off looking at the front side, which is the anterior lobe of the pituitary. The anterior pituitary is made of epithelial tissue. If you remember in Unit 3, epithelial tissue is solid sheets of cells. Could be one layer, could be simple, could be stratified, or many layers. Glandular epithelium was one of the types of epithelial tissue, and that just looks like, all that looks like is simple cuboidal epithelium, but those cells actually produce and secrete something. Here they're secreting hormones. So anterior is just glandular tissue making and secreting its own product. The back lobe is called the posterior pituitary, and it's made up of a different type of tissue. It is actually made of neural tissue, so it is very similar to the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus in your brain, actually during development, it pulls down to form the posterior pituitary. So it is more nervous tissue, like as in the brain. Okay? So the actual relationship between the two, the hypothalamus actually does produce two hormones that the posterior pituitary just stores and releases. So let's talk about this relationship, the hypothalamus pituitary relationship. The hypothalamus would be like the factory, okay, where a substance is made, and the pituitary is just like FedEx. Okay, it's just the storage and shipping area. But the hypothalamus has no way to send out its own hormone. Those hormones actually do just travel down the infundibulum, the stalk, down into the posterior pituitary storage area. Okay, so looking at those structures, so here we have the hypothalamus, which is the kind of the light pink, and pituitary, which is that dark pink. And you can see it has two little lobes to it, the anterior and posterior pituitary, right? And so here the words are a little fuzzy. I just wanted you to see the picture, and I liked how you could see the sella turcica. So I'm just highlighting the sella turcica. Okay, this is the sella turcica of the sphenoid bone, right? That little depression there in the sphenoid bone, okay? And that is where the pituitary is protected. So here we can see the anterior and posterior pituitary. We see the infundibulum, which is just the stalk that it hangs down from. And then up here is the hypothalamus. Okay, and there's two lobes. You also see a capillary bed, which is a network of blood vessels supplying oxygen and nutrients to the pituitary gland. So blown up a little bit and a little simplified, we have the hypothalamus up here in the brown. Okay, and then down here we have the anterior pituitary and the posterior pituitary. And you see that this is a pituitary stalk, and that's actually called the infundibulum. The infundibulum. And you see a neuron tract or a bunch of axons. So that is how these are all connected. The hypothalamus and the pituitary are both nervous tissue. So those hormones that the hypothalamus produces travels down that axon branch. Okay. So now let's jump right in. We're going to start with the anterior pituitary. So we first put our gland. We're going to do the anterior pituitary hormones first. So this little pea-shaped pituitary or pea-sized pituitary gland actually secretes 8 hormones, very important hormones coming out of that little bitty pea. Traditionally, we used to call the anterior pituitary the master gland because it controls a lot of functions. But now we know that the hypothalamus actually triggers the pituitary to secrete hormones. So now it's called the master gland. Most hormones secreted by the anterior pituitary are tropic hormones. They're tropic, which means they regulate other endocrine glands. So if you remember in the endo video number 1, I called those boss hormones. Those hormones are just bossing other endocrine glands around. Okay, they're not actually causing any kind of function in a cell themselves. Right. So let's jump into the hormones that are secreted by the anterior pituitary. So we're going to list, and I have it very consistent in your notes. It's going to go hormone, target, function for each one. So the first hormone secreted by the anterior pituitary is the growth hormone or GH. Okay. The growth hormone, for every hormone that is sent out, that is secreted from an endocrine gland, it is taken up into the bloodstream and they all have a target cell. Remember, there's certain shape receptors on the hormone and a certain shape receptor on the target cell. And these hormones here are water soluble, so they go through that cyclic AMP mechanism if you're honors and you went through the hormone function. Otherwise, there's a receptor on the cell. So growth hormone targets your muscles, your bones, your liver, and your cartilage. So we're talking about growth in height, growth in weight. Right? And once that hormone gets there, the function is skeletal and cellular growth to increase your fat breakdown and increase your blood glucose so that there's sugar in your bloodstream for growth to occur. So hormone, target, function. Now a few hormones we're going to get into talking about what happens if you don't have enough of that hormone and what happens if you have too much. So let's talk about those prefixes. So remember, we've got hypo and hyper. We've seen those before. But if you have a hyposecretion of a hormone, you don't have enough. There's not enough, right? And if you have a hypersecretion of that hormone, you have too much of that hormone. Okay, so here is too little and here is too much. So if that hormone is secreted in either one of these ways, too little or too much, it can cause great effects on the body. Okay, homeostatic imbalances where you get off of your homeostasis. So let's first look at what happens if you have too much growth hormone in childhood. So make sure you pay attention to when in life that happens. So if you have too much growth hormone, a hypersecretion of growth hormone in childhood, it causes something called gigantism. It's actually called gigantism. Right? And we are going to look at this a little further when we do our endocrine disorders Padlet, but that's in 2 Mondays from now, okay? Or Tuesday and Wednesday, 2 weeks from now. but we are going to get into a little bit in this unit, a few disorders. So gigantism is too much growth hormone in childhood. And why I say childhood, that is because we have still active epiphyseal plates. Remember that epiphyseal plate in our epiphysis, in our long bones? Those are your growth plates, where height comes from, longitudinal growth in that bone. So if you have too much of that hormone in childhood, your bones keep growing in length, and you get taller and taller and taller, okay? Talking about, you're 6'5", 6'6", 6'7", I mean, even 6'3", 6'4" sometimes. If that is not normal for your family, and all of a sudden you have someone who is 6'4", and everyone in their family is 5'3" and under throughout their family line, there could be a hypersecretion of growth hormone. But if there's a hypersecretion of growth hormone in adulthood, after your epiphyseal plates have fused and now they're epiphyseal lines, you're not growing in height anymore, then that's called something called, and that's called acromegaly or acromegaly. I've heard it both ways. That is where now you're just growing in bulk and in mass. You're not growing in height, but all of your tissues are growing. And so it can be very detrimental because you're talking about growth of your cardiac muscle tissue in your heart, growth in all of your bones and mass. So it has some devastating effects on the body. Then what happens if you don't have enough growth hormone in childhood? And that's called pituitary dwarfism. Pituitary dwarfism. Here where you don't get enough growth hormone in childhood, and that is just where your growth is stunted. You reach a certain height and you stop. So all of your features are still childlike. So these are just examples of hyper and hyposecretion of a hormone. The second hormone secreted by the anterior pituitary is called the thyroid stimulating hormone. Thyroid stimulating hormone. Or it's called TSH, but another name for it is thyrotropin, thyrotropic. Sorry, I'm writing and talking at the same time. Thyrotropic. So remember, when you see the word tropic, you know that, you immediately want to go, that's the boss. That hormone is just there to boss another endocrine gland around. And it tells you in the name, okay? So the target is the thyroid. We're targeting the thyroid here. So you might want to highlight your targets and functions for each hormone, but I'm going to let you do that. I don't want to have a whole lot of highlighting on mine. So the target is the thyroid because we're talking about stimulating the thyroid. The function is it stimulates the thyroid to secrete its hormone. It actually tells the thyroid what to do. The thyroid does not know to secrete its own hormone unless thyrotropic or TSH is secreted by the brain. So the pituitary gland will tell the thyroid when it's time to get off its lazy behind and secrete its own hormones. Okay? So that's a tropic hormone. The third hormone secreted by the anterior pituitary is also a tropic hormone, and it has a really long name. It is called the adrenocorticotropic hormone. Adrenocorticotropic hormone. Make sure we write hormone so we know that each one of these numbers is a hormone. And it's called ACTH. Adrenocorticotropic. Again, it is a tropic hormone. So when we see tropic, we think boss. Okay? And so it actually has it in the name, even though it's a little Latin-y in the name. It targets the adrenal cortex, a part of your adrenal gland that sits on top of your kidneys. And the function, it's a tropic hormone. It stimulates the adrenal cortex to secrete its hormone. Adrenal cortex gland does not do anything at all until ACTH is secreted by your brain, the pituitary gland in your brain, and tells it to get off its lazy behind and get to work. Okay? The fourth hormone secreted by the anterior pituitary is not a tropic hormone. And so it has greatly different effects than the others. It is called prolactin. Prolactin hormone. or PRL. Okay. The prolactin hormone targets the female breast, and the function is it promotes lactation, and lactation is milk production. So this happens when a female is pregnant. So pregnancy hormones will trigger the anterior pituitary to secrete prolactin that causes the breast tissue, the mammary glands in the breast, to start producing milk. That milk doesn't come out yet. That is another hormone that we'll talk about in a minute. All this hormone does is get milk, produces milk ready to feed that baby. Okay, so and as long as a baby is breastfeeding, this hormone will be secreted. So you will have milk production for as long as there's demand. All right, the next two hormones and the last two secreted by the anterior pituitary are both tropic hormones. So they're in a category called the gonadotropic hormones. Gonadotropic. I don't know why I put really long lines sometimes, because I know I write big, but still. So remember, tropic. So these are going to boss another gland around. There are two types of gonadotropic hormones, and they mainly are named based on what they do in the female body, but they're also present in the male body and have different functions, obviously. The first gonadotropic hormone is called the follicle stimulating hormone. Follicle stimulating hormone. Okay. The follicle stimulating hormone is a tropic hormone. It is a gonadotropic hormone. It targets the gonads because it has it in the name, gonadotropic. The gonads are the ovaries and testes. Gonad just means the sex organ, the organ in a human body that produces the sex cell. The ovaries produce the female egg, and the testes produce the male sperm, the sex cell. So then the function, we have different functions, obviously. The function in ovaries is it stimulates follicle development and promotes estrogen production. So a follicles are found inside, so ovaries have many follicles. Inside each follicle, there's one ovum or egg, and then plural is ova, one ovum or egg maturing in each follicle. And there are many, many follicles in the ovaries. So these follicles, this is stimulating these follicles to mature their egg, to get ready for that egg to be matured so that it could be ovulated. But that's going to be on the next hormone. Okay, so all this is doing, all we're talking about here is maturing that egg. Okay, developing that follicle, getting that egg ready. And it causes the ovaries to secrete estrogen. Okay, so it's basically telling the female ovaries, all right, get off your butt, start to secrete your hormone estrogen, and start maturing those ova in these follicles. Right? Males also have follicle stimulating hormone, even though they don't have follicles. So all it does in males is it stimulates sperm development. Okay? Females are born with all the ova, all the eggs that they're ever going to have in their lifetime. Males constantly produce sperm from puberty until death, right? So they're constantly multiplying through mitosis and actually meiosis, because you're halving the gene count. So what we're doing here, the chromosome count. So what we're doing is we're just stimulating that development, okay? So that's follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH. That's how you'll see it listed on a clinical sheet from a doctor's office. So the second gonadotropic hormone is called luteinizing hormone. The luteinizing hormone. Luteinizing, I feel country when I say that. The luteinizing hormone. The luteinizing hormone, or it's called LH. Luteinizing hormone is also a tropic hormone because it is one of two gonadotropic hormones. Even though it doesn't have tropic in the specific name, it is a gonadotropic hormone. So here it also targets the gonads, which are ovaries and testes, whether you're male or female, XX or XY. And I did those backwards. Female is XX, male is XY, what you're born with. And so the function in ovaries, it triggers ovulation. Ovulation is the release of an egg, from follicle. It triggers whichever follicle matures their egg the fastest and is the most mature at this point will get to release their egg. And that egg will be sent out into the uterine tube or fallopian tube to wait around to see if the sperm is present. And then it stimulates the production and secretion of progesterone, which is the pregnancy hormone. So at this point, you sent an egg out to find its knight in shining sperm. You started secreting the hormone progesterone, which is the pregnancy hormone, all in the hopes that egg and sperm will fertilize and there will be a pregnancy. So if not, if there is no fertilization, the egg is shed, the lining of the uterus is shed. We're going to get much more into that in reproductive system, and that causes a menstrual cycle. Progesterone then stops being secreted because there's no pregnancy, so you don't need a pregnancy hormone. Males also have luteinizing hormone, and it promotes testosterone production. So it causes the male testes to secrete their own hormone, one of their male hormones called testosterone. Okay, so here, just looking at the hormones released by the anterior pituitary, these are the tropic hormones. So it says hormonal stimulus, and this wasn't a picture up above, but I just like to have it individually when we do this. These are the tropic hormones secreted. So the thyroid gland, thyrotropic, bosses around the thyroid gland. Adrenocorticotropic, or ACTH, bosses the adrenal cortex. The gonadotropic hormones, follicle stimulating and luteinizing, both boss the gonads. Okay, here just showing you one testis. All right, and so next, that ends with the anterior pituitary, okay, and we're just going to do the posterior. So anterior pituitary had 6 hormones: growth, thyroid stimulating, adrenocorticotropic, prolactin, the gonadotropic hormones, follicle stimulating, and luteinizing. So then what we have left are 2 hormones secreted by the posterior pituitary. So we're on to a different gland. The letter are the glands. So this is the posterior pituitary, which is made up of nervous tissue. Remember, this one is not producing any of these hormones. It's just secreting them. Remember, it's just like FedEx. FedEx is not making its own products. All it's doing is shipping them out for you. Okay? So the first hormone secreted by the posterior pituitary, and it's not producing it, remember, it's only secreting it. This one is called oxytocin. Oxytocin hormone. It targets the uterus and breasts. Okay, so a female hormone. The uterus is where the embryo is going to implant for pregnancy. The function here is to stimulate uterine muscle contractions. The uterus is lined with smooth muscle tissue, which is involuntary. So when this hormone is secreted by your posterior pituitary in your brain, it triggers your uterus to start contracting and pushing in on that fetus so that it can push the fetus out through vaginal delivery. Okay, so this is when labor begins. So if you want to write, this is labor. Okay, this is childbirth. It also, and I wrote that right there. I see that now. Okay, let's take that off. Okay, which initiates labor and milk production. So actually it's milk ejection is another way we could say that, which is called the letdown reflex. Okay, because prolactin helped to produce that milk, but we don't want it coming out during pregnancy, okay, and wasting that milk. We want it to come out when there's a baby on the breast. So it's the suckling of a baby on the breast actually causes this hormone to be secreted, which causes milk to be let out of the breast. And this is controlled by positive feedback. These one of the only hormones that is for positive feedback. Do you remember when we did Unit 1 and we did homeostasis? And I said there's only 3 times that positive feedback is beneficial in the body. Well, here's 2 of them right here. Okay, childbirth, we want to go against our equilibrium, against our homeostasis, and contract that uterus and open up that cervix, which is the opening to the uterus. We want that to dilate. And we want milk to be produced. Okay, that's not normal in the breast to have milk to be produced. We want it to go against our homeostasis in these 2 instances so that the baby can be delivered and we can feed that baby. Okay, and so females that are have their labor induced, they're actually going to get a synthetic form called Pitocin. Pitocin is synthetic oxytocin. So when you ever hear of a woman being induced, her labor being induced, or if her labor is progressing slowly, which is what happened to me with my twins, I was given Pitocin to kind of jumpstart that delivery. And so that just triggers that uterus to contract and that milk to come out. So that's positive feedback. All right, and the second hormone secreted by the posterior pituitary is called the antidiuretic hormone. Antidiuretic. Okay, I know I spelled that wrong. Antidiuretic hormone, or ADH. They all have their little abbreviations, okay? And here we're targeting the kidneys. And first I want to tell you that the word diuresis means urine production, okay? So to produce urine, to let out the water in your body, okay, and all the waste, metabolic waste, okay, in your urine. So if something is against producing urine, holds water in your body instead of letting it out, that's called an antidiuretic. So that actually inhibits urine production. So by urine production, I mean letting out the water that's in your body, okay? Your kidneys do not know that some water needs to stay in the body. Okay, they do not self-know that. So all fluid is urinated out through your bladder, right? So there has to be a hormone to tell your kidneys like, whoa, dude, hold up. We're getting kind of dehydrated here, okay? Our water balance is really low, so that's messing up our solute concentration, our sodium and potassium levels. So that makes your electrolyte balance go way off. So this hormone is an antidiuretic. It doesn't let your kidneys take all the water out of your body, okay? So the function is it stimulates the kidney tubules cells, the tiny tubes in the kidney, to absorb water from the forming urine, to bring your water, the whole point is to bring your water balance, back up, right? And so ADH is only secreted by the posterior pituitary gland in your brain when your water balance is going down, okay? When you're getting dehydrated. So it will tell you, so this hormone tells you how much you can pee when you go to the bathroom, okay? And so if you go to the bathroom and your urine is really dark yellow or orange, you have a lot of antidiuretic hormone in your bloodstream. That means you are so dehydrated. This hormone is telling your kidneys like, dude, you got to hold every bit of water you can. We're really dehydrated here, okay? I know that's weird to talk about going to the bathroom, but this is A&P. If you go to the bathroom and your urine is really light yellow, really clear, you have a low level of ADH in your bloodstream because you're fully hydrated. There's no reason to tell your kidneys to hold in any of that water. So you want your urine to be very, very light yellow, okay? So that's the antidiuretic hormone. Well, here I do want to point out a homeostatic imbalance. What happens if you don't have enough ADH, antidiuretic hormone, secreted? Okay, and that is a disorder called diabetes insipidus. Diabetes insipidus. No, this is different than sugar diabetes. Sugar diabetes is called diabetes mellitus. Diabetes insipidus here is a hyposecretion of ADH. You don't have enough. So if you're not secreting enough ADH, your kidneys do not know to hold in any water, okay? So your water balance, your electrolyte balance is very off and you're very dehydrated. It causes extreme thirst and excessive urine output. Constant need to go to the bathroom because your kidneys are like, hey, water, everybody out. Like, everybody go. They're not told to hold any water in. And so what could cause temporary diabetes insipidus is drinking alcohol. Alcohol, actually, when it hits the bloodstream and it goes past that blood-brain barrier where some substances can get up to the brain, it actually inhibits ADH from being secreted. Alcohol just kind of tells the posterior pituitary to kind of chill out, okay? Don't secrete your hormones. Like, you don't need to secrete this. We gotcha. So there's no ADH secreted by the posterior pituitary. So your kidneys, again, don't know to hold any water in. So all the fluid that comes through the kidneys, when your kidneys are filtering your blood, all that fluid is just urinated out. So it causes extreme urine output. And so the hangover effect, if you've ever watched movies where people have drank alcohol in the movies and they have what's called the hangover, there's movies about that. That hangover is just extreme dehydration. Extreme dehydration. Okay, where you have a very dry mouth. You've seen these people in the movies, okay, because y'all are not old enough to partake. In the movies, you see that they have what's called a dry mouth, that they have a headache, that they have extreme fatigue. All of that is due to extreme dehydration, okay? So you should tell those people in the movies that they need to dehydrate, okay? To fully hydrate. Drink lots and lots and lots of water, okay? Because until alcohol is out of your bloodstream, your kidneys don't know to hold any water in, okay? And so ADH is also used as a vasopressin. So if you don't have enough ADH, you will actually cause your blood vessels to constrict to hold in more fluid. So it's used as a medication also. Okay, so that's where we're going to stop today. I know that pituitary is major, but that's why I'm doing 4 different videos. So we have here we have 8 different hormones, 6 secreted by the anterior pituitary and 2 secreted by the posterior pituitary. Each hormone has a hormone, target, and function. Okay? That's all for pituitary. Pike out.